So as we just heard, the United States is now urging its allies to raise defense spending. And there have been concerns over Washington's recently released national security strategy, with some viewing North Korea missing from the document as a possible shift in U.S. priorities. For more on this, we're joined today by Mason Richey, Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Richey, thanks for joining us this morning.
Great, good morning.
So U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said, like we just heard, model allies like South Korea, that take more responsibility for their defense will get special favor from Washington. What does that tell us about how the Trump administration views its allies?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is, be careful in the sense that you can be in favor at one moment under the Trump administration and then be out the next. Certainly now, things seem to be stable and in certain ways, moving in a positive direction, at least from South Korea's perspective. If you were interested, in building your military out more through increased budget outlays, obviously developing possibly these nuclear-powered submarines and the uranium enrichment capabilities that come along with that. But let's not forget that the trade extortion over the last 9 months or so with the United States, has also been done under the banner of South Korea being a favorite ally. So I think the second major point I would say is that it's unclear how valuable it is sometimes to be a quote-unquote favorite ally of the United States, and it may not get you what you expect. And we can see that even right now with Japan, which has not received much visible support from the United States during this recent spate of rhetorical aggression from China after the Prime Minister brought up the point that a massive attack or a change in China's posture towards Taiwan would be an existential issue for Japan, which is more or less longstanding policy, and yet China reacted very aggressively, and the U.S. hasn't been there really to support Japan. And so, what does it mean to be a favorite ally in the United States is sort of an open question right now.
Right, and the issue of North Korea was left out of the Trump administration's newly released national security strategy, and that raised a lot of concern here in South Korea. Does this mean the United States no longer sees North Korea as a top priority anymore?
The short answer to that, I think, is yes, although, I think one could make the argument that that has been a case for a while, both under Trump 2.0 and even under the Biden administration. But I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that also may change, and the national security strategy doesn't really mean much in many instances in terms of issue-level engagement by the U.S. It's important as a document that provides us with some insight into the mindset of the administration. Obviously, it tells us something about its broad priorities, which of course included, China and a very surprising, rhetorical confrontation with Europe, as well as something that had been indicated for quite a while, which is the refocusing on the Western Hemisphere. In any event, with respect to North Korea, that could change, right? The Trump administration, I think, is opportunistic, and Trump himself is opportunistic and a little bit mercurial, and so North Korea could come back onto the radar in terms of a target of opportunity for dialogue in the future, especially in maybe the first half of 2026, if Trump and Xi end up meeting in China. You can imagine the United States might add potential for North Korea dialogue as a sidecar to the other issues that they would deal with in the region.
Right, and more broadly, the United States also continues to seek to end the war in Ukraine. But recent talks between U.S. and Ukrainian officials in Florida ended without any breakthrough. Are the two sides moving further away from ending the war?
I'm not exactly sure which two sides you mean. If you mean the U.S. and Ukraine, they're not at war. So, I mean, the Ukraine and Russia, don't seem to be finding any overlap in in the possibility to find an end to the war, and that's entirely due to Russia, so far as I can tell. And in that sense, yeah, I think the United States is not successfully brokering a deal, and that's largely because the United States isn't sufficiently supporting Ukraine, either monetarily or with weaponry, in order to defend itself, such that Ukraine can impose losses and costs on Russia sufficient to drive Russia to the negotiating table. To the contrary, it seems like rhetorically the United States finds Ukraine to be more of the problem than Russia does, I think really to the eternal shame of the Trump administration. Until the United States gets tough on Russia, or until China starts to get tougher on Russia, or until Europe steps up even more to the plate with weapons, it's hard to imagine how Russia is going to fold and come to the negotiating table. And so therefore, it really becomes a question of who gets attrited first. Is it going to be Russia, which starts to have manpower losses and sufficient financial difficulties that Putin feels obligated to come to the table? Or is it going to be Ukraine through all of the various sacrifices and horrors that it's going through, and the manpower losses and the material losses that it's experiencing?
All right, and speaking of that, some analysts say Zelensky faces a choice between a bad deal and no deal at all. Is Ukraine giving up land for security the only possible way to end this war, and what options does Ukraine have?
Well, I think that our understanding, I think, from the last several weeks of diplomacy. And I should say diplomacy. I mean, honestly, what the Trump administration doing isn't really diplomacy. But these last couple of weeks of supposed deal making, which have not seemed to result in anything, seem to indicate that Zelensky might have come around a little bit on some of the trading land for a cessation of hostilities. But the 28-point plan, and then the slimmed down version of that, and the revised version of that, it seemed to carry it. Too many sacrifices on Ukraine's part. And I think that the main principle, among others, in terms of a land ceding, would be if Ukraine is being asked to surrender territory that Russia doesn't currently control. If Russia ends up administering de facto land that it has already taken from Ukraine, that's one thing. And I think Ukraine could probably be persuaded to do that if there were other security guarantees and other things in the deal. But if Russia is going to be given additional land in Ukraine that goes beyond the line of contact and the line of control that Russia has currently, I think that's a deal breaker for Ukraine if things continue on the same trajectory they are now. Now, you ask about cards. Ukraine has a very bad hand to play. And there's no doubt about that. And the more that the United States withholds support, either diplomatically or militarily or financially, the worse that is, unless Europe or other partners step up and assist Ukraine more. By the way, one of those could be South Korea. We haven't seen the administration here moving in that direction in any way, but it doesn't matter necessarily for Ukraine where that assistance comes from, but it's going to have to come probably from somewhere in order for them to impose sufficient costs on Russia to back out of this war.
Right, we'll have to see how that plays out. All right, Professor Richey, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Great, thanks for having me.